I'm Evelyn, 32 female. I live in a city 3 states away from my childhood home, in a quiet apartment that I've decorated myself, filled with plants and books. I built a career from scratch as an event planner, a job that requires meticulous attention to detail, a calm demeanor under pressure, and the ability to manage the expectations of dozens of people at once. I'm good at it. I'm organized, I'm efficient, and I make beautiful things happen for other people. For a long time, I thought that was my purpose. But this story isn't about one of my clients. It's about the event I was never hired to plan, for the clients who never paid, and the day I finally decided to send my invoice. It's about my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and how a 3-ring binder full of demands finally showed me the difference between family duty and unpaid labor. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was finalizing the seating chart for a high-profile charity gala. The caller ID flashed, Mom, and I felt that familiar, reflexive tightening in my stomach. It wasn't dread, exactly, but the bracing of a muscle before an expected impact. I clicked the green icon and put on my cheerful, capable voice. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" "Evelyn, darling," my mother, Louise, began, her voice a smooth blend of practiced charm and underlying urgency. "Everything is just chaos here. Absolute chaos." I could hear the faint clinking of her teacup against its saucer, a sound that meant she was settled in her favorite armchair, the very picture of manufactured crisis. I pictured her perfectly. Hair impeccably styled, even at 10 in the morning, her retired interior designer's eye scanning her flawless living room for any dust mote that dared to settle. "What's going on?" I asked, already knowing the answer. It was the same answer it had been for years. A holiday needed planning, a relative needed hosting, or a major life event was on the horizon. "The anniversary, of course. Your father and I, 40 years. Can you believe it?" she said, a rhetorical question that required an enthusiastic response. "It feels like only yesterday Gary was tracking mud all over my mother's carpets." "It's wonderful, Mom. A real milestone," I said, my pen doodling a floral pattern on a notepad. "It is, and it has to be perfect. Absolutely perfect. We're having everyone. 100 guests in the garden. It's going to be the event of the season," she declared. "And darling, we need you." There it was, not "we'd love your help," or "would you be willing to," but the simple, declarative "we need you." It was the cornerstone of our relationship, the verbal signature on an unspoken contract I had apparently signed at birth. I was the responsible one, the planner, the fixer. My younger sister, Megan, was the celebrated one, the one who was praised for simply existing. "Of course," I said, the words tasting like ash. "What did you have in mind?" "Oh, I have it all figured out," she said breezily. "I've put everything together in a binder for you. It'll make it so much easier. When can you get here? The party is Saturday week." The casualness of it was breathtaking. She expected me to drop my entire life, my business, my clients, my own home, with less than 2 weeks' notice to execute a party for 100 people. My own charity gala, which I had been working on for 6 months, was the day after her party. The logistics of flying back and forth, managing 2 massive events concurrently, made my head spin. But to her, my career was a cute hobby, something that could be paused at her convenience. I explained the conflict. "Mom, I have the children's hospital gala that weekend. It's a huge event. I can't just leave." A sigh, heavy and laden with disappointment, traveled down the phone line. "Evelyn, this is your family. This is for your father and me. 40 years. That gala happens every year. Surely they can manage without you for a day or two." The guilt was a physical thing, a thick, syrupy substance pouring into my veins. It was her greatest weapon, and she wielded it with surgical precision. "I'll see what I can do," I murmured, a phrase that in my family meant, "I surrender." "Wonderful, I knew you'd understand what's important," she said, her voice bright again, the crisis averted. "The binder is waiting." 3 days later, I was standing in my parents' immaculate foyer, a travel bag at my feet, and a sense of weary resignation settling over me. The house was a monument to their life together. My father, Gary, a retired architect, had designed it himself. Every line was clean, every space intentional. My mother had decorated it in shades of cream and soft gray, a place so pristine it felt more like a magazine spread than a home. My father greeted me with a brief, awkward hug. "Good of you to come, Ev," he said, his eyes already drifting towards the Golf Channel on the television in the living room. He was a man who had built his life around avoiding conflict, a passive observer in the domestic drama his wife directed. My sister Megan drifted down the grand staircase, phone in hand, thumb scrolling endlessly. At 28, she was a successful social media influencer, a career that involved taking beautifully lit photos of herself and writing captions about authenticity. She lived in a guest suite above the garage, a temporary arrangement that had stretched into its third year. "Oh, hey," she said, barely looking up. "Mom's in the sunroom. She's got your instruction manual." I found my mother at her writing desk, a thick white 3-ring binder sitting in front of her like a sacred text. "Evelyn, there you are," she said, standing to give me a kiss on the cheek that felt more like a transfer of ownership. "Here it is, everything you'll need." She handed me the binder. It was heavy. I opened it to the first page. Typed in a neat, serif font were the words, "Louise and Gary's 40th anniversary celebration, an evening of elegance." Below it, in my mother's looping script, was my name, Project Manager, Evelyn. I wasn't a guest, I wasn't even a daughter helping out. I was an employee, an unpaid one. The binder was terrifyingly thorough. It had tabs for catering, florals, entertainment, decor, and staffing. Under each tab were lists of her demands. For catering, she wanted a 5-course tasting menu from a Michelin-starred restaurant in the city, an oyster bar, and a champagne tower. For florals, she demanded peonies, out of season and astronomically expensive, and a custom-built floral archway for the garden entrance. The entertainment was to be a live string quartet. The most chilling tab was the last one, Day of Duties. It was a minute-by-minute schedule, starting at 6:00 a.m. It listed my tasks: oversee all vendor arrivals, arrange all 100 place settings, greet the guests, direct the hired servers, manage the bar, coordinate the timing for speeches, and finally, lead post-event cleanup. My name was next to every single item. Nowhere in the 100-plus pages of plans was there a single moment for me to sit, to eat, to be a daughter celebrating her parents. The unspoken contract had been put in writing, bound, and presented as a gift. It was a manual for my servitude, and as I stood there, flipping through page after page of expectations, I felt a cold, hard knot forming in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't a request for help. This was a command performance. The weight of the binder in my hands was more than just paper and plastic. It was the physical manifestation of 32 years of expectations. As I stood in the sun-drenched room, the scent of my mother's lemon polish in the air, my mind reeled backward, connecting this moment to 1,000 others just like it. This legacy of demands wasn't new. It was the very foundation of my relationship with my family. I remembered my 10th birthday. I had wanted a simple party at the local bowling alley with my friends. My mother decided that was too common. Instead, she orchestrated a high tea in the garden, inviting her friends and their impeccably dressed, painfully bored children. I was instructed to wear a frilly dress I hated and pass around tiny, crustless sandwiches while my mother accepted compliments on her lovely party. It wasn't my celebration. I was a prop in her production. Then there was Megan's 16th birthday. She wanted a massive, my super sweet 16-style blowout. By then, I was a teenager with a burgeoning talent for organization. My mother, recognizing my competence, put me in charge. For 2 months, I spent my after-school hours and weekends booking a DJ, designing invitations, and coordinating with a caterer. I built a balloon arch in our driveway until my fingers were raw. On the night of the party, while Megan was being celebrated and showered with gifts, I was in the kitchen, making sure the caterers refilled the buffet and directing people to the bathrooms. When one of my mother's friends commented on how wonderful everything was, My mother smiled and said, "Thank you. I do try to make things special for my girls." She never mentioned my role. I received no thank you, no acknowledgement. My only reward was the silent, implicit understanding that I had performed my duty correctly. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. When my father retired, I planned the party. When my grandparents celebrated their 50th anniversary, I coordinated the travel and accommodation for 24 family members flying in from across the country. Every Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving, the responsibility of the meal, the decorations, and the seating chart fell to me. My contributions were never framed as favors or kindnesses. They were simply like the rising of the sun. Any attempt to set a boundary was met with a carefully crafted narrative of my selfishness. "But Evelyn, it's for the family," my mother would say, her voice laced with disappointment. "Don't you want us all to have a nice time?" "Your sister gets so stressed out by these things," my father would add, his way of saying, "Don't rock the boat." Megan, meanwhile, floated through life on a cloud of parental subsidy and blissful ignorance. Her role was to be charming, to be beautiful, to be the family's shining star. While I was learning how to negotiate with vendors, she was learning which Instagram filter best highlighted her cheekbones. She saw my competence not as a skill to be admired, but as my designated function. I was the family's stage manager. She was the lead actress. Her only job was to show up and look good. One Christmas, a few years after I'd started my own event planning business, I made a gentle attempt to professionalize our arrangement. I was overwhelmed with work and struggling to make ends meet. I suggested that, for the massive holiday party they were planning, they consider hiring me at a heavily discounted family rate. It would help me justify taking time away from my paying clients. The reaction was stunned silence, followed by hurt indignation. "Hire you?" my mother had said, placing a hand over her heart as if I'd wounded her. "Evelyn, this is your family home. You don't charge your family for helping out." "But it's more than just helping out, Mom," I tried to explain. "This is a 60-person dinner party. It's what I do for a living. It's weeks of work." Megan had scoffed from the sofa, not even looking up from her phone. "Wow, so everything has a price tag with you now? What's next? Are you going to send Dad a bill for Father's Day?" I dropped it, of course. The shame and guilt they piled on me was too heavy to bear. I did the party for free, just as I always had. I swallowed my resentment and told myself that this was just what daughters did. But a seed of bitterness had been planted. I was watching my sister get a down payment for a luxury car as a just-because gift while I was being shamed for asking to be compensated for my professional labor. The binder in my hands was simply the latest chapter in this long, exhausting saga. It was the most audacious demand yet. Flipping through the pages, I saw the vendors my mother had suggested. They were the most expensive, sought-after professionals in the state. The caterer she wanted had a 6-month waiting list. The florist was an avant-garde artist who charged a fortune. The string quartet was from the City Symphony. She had champagne taste, but she expected to acquire it with my free labor and my professional connections. She assumed I could just call in favors, pull strings, and make magic happen because that's what I always did. I looked up from the binder and met her expectant gaze. "This is a lot, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Well, of course, darling. It's a celebration of 40 years of marriage. It has to be magnificent," she replied, as if that explained everything. "I've already told everyone how wonderful it's going to be. You know how I hate to disappoint." The unspoken part hung in the air, "And you know I'll blame you if anything goes wrong." My father wandered in, holding a newspaper. "Everything all right?" he asked, seeing the binder. "Ah, the battle plans. Your mother's been working on that for weeks." "I'm just walking Evelyn through the vision," Louise said. "She'll handle the execution." Execution. The word felt chillingly appropriate. It was the execution of my time, my energy, my professional reputation, and my dwindling sense of self-worth. Megan appeared in the doorway, a smoothie in her hand. "Are you going over the party stuff?" she asked, peering at the binder. "God, that looks intense. Better you than me." she laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Mom's in full general mode. Just do whatever she says. It's easier that way. That was the family motto. It's easier that way. Easier to let Mom have her way. Easier to let Evelyn do all the work. Easier to maintain the dysfunctional peace than to have the difficult conversations. For years, I had agreed. It was easier. But as I stood there, trapped between my mother's radiant expectation, my father's willful ignorance, and my sister's casual dismissiveness, I felt something shift inside me. The cost of easier was becoming far too high. For the next 2 days, I threw myself into the work. I operated on autopilot, reverting to the role I knew so well. I spent hours on the phone, leveraging my industry contacts to work miracles. I managed to book the caterer, sweet-talking the manager into squeezing us in by promising him a glowing professional recommendation. I found a florist who could source peonies, albeit at a staggering cost, which I put on my own credit card for the deposit, assuming I'd be reimbursed. I confirmed the string quartet. I ordered the linens, arranged the table rentals, and began drafting a timeline for the day of the party. My family saw my flurry of activity as confirmation that everything was under control. They left me to it, disappearing for hours at a time. My mother went to lunch with her friends, no doubt boasting about the spectacular party her talented daughter was arranging. My father went golfing. Megan spent her days in a cycle of gym workouts, smoothie runs, and prolonged photo shoots in the garden. I was effectively alone, camped out at the dining room table with my laptop, the binder, and a growing mountain of paperwork. I subsisted on coffee and toast, too busy to make myself a proper meal. Whenever I asked for a small bit of help, "Megan, could you just call the rental company and confirm the delivery time?" I was met with a sigh and an excuse. "Oh, I can't. I have a deadline for a sponsored post. It's super important." Her deadlines were always more important than mine. The breaking point came on Thursday evening, 3 days before the party. I had been working for 12 hours straight, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. My neck ached, and a tension headache was beginning to pulse behind my temples. I decided to take a break and get a glass of water. As I walked towards the kitchen, I heard my mother and Megan talking, their voices low and conspiratorial. I paused in the hallway, just out of sight. "And then Carol asked how much it was all costing," my mother was saying. I was very vague, of course. I just said, "When you have a daughter as talented as Evelyn, you don't have to worry about such things." Megan laughed. It was the same light, tinkling laugh from the other day, but this time it was laced with something sharp and mocking. "Seriously, free labor always shows up. It's like her superpower." My breath caught in my chest. It felt like a physical blow. Free labor. That's all I was to them. Not a daughter, not a sister. A resource. A superpower to be exploited. "Well, it saves us a fortune," Louise continued, her voice practical. "Can you imagine what a real planner would charge for this? It would be tens of thousands. Evelyn just does it for the love." I could hear the smug satisfaction in her tone. She wasn't just accepting my help. She was proud of her ability to procure it for free. She saw it as a testament to her cleverness. "It's a good thing, too," Megan added, "because that custom dress I ordered for the party was an absolute fortune. This way, you can afford to spoil your other daughter a little." "Oh, hush," my mother said, though she sounded pleased. "You deserve to look beautiful. You'll be taking so many pictures. It's important for your brand. Evelyn doesn't care about those things. She's happy in the background." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly aimed dart. Happy in the background. They had constructed an entire narrative for me, a personality that suited their needs. I was the quiet, unassuming workhorse who found fulfillment in their happiness. It had never occurred to them to simply ask me what I wanted or how I felt. They had decided for me. They had decided I was happy to be their servant. I stood frozen in the hallway, the cold tile seeping through my socks. Every favor I had ever done, every sacrifice I had ever made, flashed through my mind. I saw them not as acts of love, but as transactions in which I was the only one giving. The unpaid invoices for a lifetime of service were piling up in my head, forming a mountain of resentment so vast it threatened to suffocate me. The love I thought I was giving had been received as mere convenience. The skills I had worked so hard to develop were not a gift, but an entitlement. They weren't proud of me, they were proud of the bargain they were getting. Slowly, carefully, I backed away from the kitchen doorway. I retreated to the dining room, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I sank into the chair and stared at my laptop screen, at the spreadsheets and confirmation emails that represented hours of my life. Something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The dutiful daughter, the helpful sister, the girl who just wanted everyone to be happy, she was gone. In her place was a cold, quiet calm. The headache I'd had was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. For years, I had tried to earn their love and respect through acts of service. I thought that if I was useful enough, helpful enough, perfect enough, they would finally see me. But I realized in that moment that they had been seeing me all along. They saw exactly what I was, a tool, and they had no intention of ever treating me as anything else. The unspoken contract had been clear to them from the start. I was the only one who had misunderstood the terms. I thought it was a contract of familial love. They knew it was a contract of unpaid servitude. And the penalty for breaking it, I knew, would be their wrath and indignation. For the first time in my life, I found that I didn't care. The fear of their disapproval was suddenly gone, burned away by the cold fire of their words. They had finally given me one gift I'd never expected, the truth. And the truth, I was beginning to realize, had set me free. I sat at the dining room table for a long time, the house silent around me except for the hum of the refrigerator. The overheard conversation replayed in my mind, each word sharpening the edges of my newfound resolve. Free labor always shows up. Megan's words were a brand, searing away decades of delusion. I had not been giving a gift, I had been enabling a theft. A theft of my time, my talent, and my self-respect. The decision, when it came, was not born of rage. It was a cold, quiet, and logical conclusion. I was an event planner, a professional, and when a client breaches a contract, you terminate services. My family had breached the fundamental contract of love and respect. Services would now be terminated. With a steadiness that surprised me, I pulled my laptop closer. The screen glowed in the dimming light of the evening, illuminating the dozens of open tabs related to the anniversary party. My work was impeccable. Every detail was confirmed, every vendor secured. The foundation for a perfect event was laid, and I, the architect, was about to demolish it. I started with the caterer. I pulled up the confirmation email and found the cancellation clause. Because I had used my professional account and my long-standing relationship with the company, I had negotiated a flexible contract. Cancellations made more than 48 hours in advance would only forfeit the deposit, a deposit I had paid. I clicked on the cancellation link in the email. A small box popped up. "Are you sure you want to cancel this booking?" My cursor hovered over the yes button for only a second. Click. A confirmation message appeared. "Your booking has been successfully canceled." A strange sense of power washed over me. It was so simple. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment, and the solution was a single, quiet click. Next, the florist. This was more personal. I had called in a major favor to get the out-of-season peonies. I opened a new email. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a polite, professional message. "Dear Anna," I wrote, "due to unforeseen circumstances with the client, we will need to cancel the floral order for the Louise and Gary anniversary event. Please accept my deepest apologies for the short notice. I have, of course, forfeited the deposit and will be sending over a cancellation fee to compensate you for your time and the cost of the sourced flowers. I value our professional relationship and hope this will not cause an inconvenience." I attached a payment from my business account, a penalty I was more than willing to pay for my freedom. Click. The email was gone. One by one, I dismantled the party. The string quartet was canceled via their online portal. Click. The linen rental was voided. Click. The specialty bakery that was crafting a 3-tiered lemon and elderflower cake received a polite, apologetic phone call from a blocked number in which I claimed to be a frazzled assistant calling on behalf of the family. The marquee tent, the extra tables and chairs, the sommelier I'd booked for the wine tasting, all of it vanished into the digital ether. Click, click, click. Each action felt like severing a chain that had been wrapped around me since birth. I was methodical, efficient, and completely detached. It was as if I were managing a crisis for a client, not detonating a bomb in the middle of my own family. I left no trace. All cancellations were made through my accounts or untraceable phone calls. My parents' names were on none of the original bookings. I had handled everything to shield them from the stress of logistics. Now, that same buffer would shield me from immediate discovery. They had no idea who the vendors were or how to contact them. They had the binder, but the binder listed me as the point of contact for everything. When the last cancellation was confirmed, I closed my laptop. The dining room was dark now. I looked at the binder, its white cover gleaming faintly. It was nothing more than a book of fiction now, a detailed description of a party that would never happen. Then I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom. The room was preserved as it had been when I left for college, a museum of. The girl I used to be, I didn't linger. I opened my suitcase and began to pack, my movements swift and silent. I folded my clothes neatly, placed my toiletries in their bag, and zipped it all shut. I took one last look around, not with nostalgia, but with the dispassionate eye of a stranger. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a house. Before I left, I wrote a note. I found a piece of plain stationery on the desk and wrote 4 simple sentences. Something unavoidable has come up with my gala event, and I have to return immediately. I'm so sorry for the timing. I hope the party is wonderful. Love, Evelyn. The love felt like a lie, but it was a necessary piece of camouflage. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want a dramatic, tear-filled argument. I wanted a clean, silent exit. The real message would be delivered on Saturday, not by me, but by the cavernous silence of an empty garden. I placed the note on top of the binder on the dining room table. It was the perfect place. It ensured my mother would find it, but only when she went to review my duties. With my suitcase in hand, I crept down the stairs. The television was off, the lights were low. My parents and sister were likely in their rooms, secure in the knowledge that I was toiling away on their behalf. I slipped out the side door, the click of the lock deafeningly loud in the quiet of the night. The cool night air felt incredible on my skin. As I drove away from the house, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I just kept driving, heading for the highway. With every mile I put between myself and that house, the weight on my shoulders seemed to lighten. I wasn't running away. I was driving toward my own life. The quiet hum of my car's engine was the sound of my emancipation. The legacy of demands had been broken, not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating click of a button. I spent Friday, the day before the party, in a state of suspended calm. I drove the 5 hours back to my city, checked into a luxurious hotel I couldn't really afford, and turned off my phone. I ordered room service, took a long bath, and slept for 10 uninterrupted hours. It felt like my body was recovering from a long illness. For the first time in years, I was not responsible for anyone's happiness but my own. The silence was glorious. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, the storm was gathering. I didn't know the exact sequence of events until much later, when my Aunt Margaret, my mother's estranged but ever-observant sister, pieced it all together for me. The unraveling began, as Margaret told it, around noon on Friday. My mother, Louise, floated downstairs, expecting to see me hunched over my laptop. Instead, she found the dining room empty, save for the binder and my neatly penned note. Annoyance, not panic, was her first reaction. Honestly, she complained to my father, Gary, you'd think Evelyn would know better than to run off like this at the last minute. Her work ethic is usually so good. She assumed I had just gone back to the city for a few hours to handle a minor crisis with my gala. She was confident I would be back by morning, ready to execute her perfect party. She spent the afternoon getting a manicure and calling her friends to remind them to wear garden chic attire. The first tremor hit around 3:00 p.m. A man from the rental company called the house landline. My mother answered, expecting a confirmation call. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson," the man said. "This is just a courtesy call to confirm that your cancellation for tomorrow's delivery of 1 marquee tent, 15 round tables, and 100 Chaivari chairs has been processed. Your account has been credited, minus the deposit." My mother laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, there must be some mistake. We haven't canceled anything. We need those things for our party tomorrow." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the man said politely. "But the cancellation was submitted online last night by the account holder, Evelyn Thompson. It's all been confirmed." My mother hung up the phone, a prickle of unease finally piercing her serene confidence. She called my cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a text. "Evelyn, the rental company called about a cancellation. Call me immediately. This is not funny." She tried to brush it off as a misunderstanding. She turned her attention to Megan, who was in the living room trying to get the perfect selfie in the afternoon light. "Megan, darling, have you heard from your sister?" "No," Megan said, puckering her lips at her phone screen. "Why?" "The rental company seems to think she's canceled the tent. It's absurd." An hour later, the second tremor hit. The florist, Anna, a professional I had a deep respect for, decided to call my mother directly as a courtesy, just to ensure there were no crossed wires. She had my parents' number from the original inquiry I had made on their behalf. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice full. L of professional sympathy. "I was so sorry to hear you had to cancel the arrangements for your anniversary party. I know how much you wanted those peonies. I do hope everything is all right." This time, real panic began to set in. My mother's voice was sharp. "We did not cancel. Who told you we canceled?" "Evelyn emailed me last night," Anna replied gently. She was very apologetic and said there were unforeseen circumstances. She even paid a cancellation fee. After that call, the dam broke. My mother, now frantic, grabbed the binder. She started trying to call the vendors listed inside, but her name meant nothing to them. All the contracts, all the arrangements were under my name and my business. They wouldn't give her any information, citing client confidentiality. The string quartet, the bakery, the caterer, stone walls, every one of them. She was the host of a party for 100 people in less than 24 hours, and she had no tent, no tables, no chairs, no flowers, no cake, and no food. The house descended into chaos. Louise was pacing the floor, her voice rising in hysteria. Gary, roused from his comfortable denial, tried to be helpful. "Well, let's just call another caterer," he suggested, as if booking a 5-course meal for 100 people could be done on a Friday night with a simple phone call. They called every high-end restaurant and catering company in a 50-mile radius. They were laughed at. They were told it was impossible. Their desperation grew with each rejection. Megan was, by all accounts, completely useless. Her initial reaction was disbelief, which quickly morphed into a tantrum. "What am I supposed to tell my followers?" she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "I promised them a live story of the most beautiful party ever. Evelyn has ruined my engagement numbers." Her self-absorption was so profound that it didn't even occur to her to help find a solution. She saw the problem only through the lens of her own personal brand. My mother's rage and panic eventually coalesced and found its target: me. She left a string of increasingly unhinged voicemails on my phone. They started with feigned concern. "Evelyn, darling, we're worried. Please call." Escalated to anger. "This is the most selfish, irresponsible thing you have ever done. You are ruining our anniversary." And finally devolved into sputtering threats. "You will regret this, Evelyn. You have embarrassed this family for the last time." By Friday evening, the reality of the situation had crashed down on them. Their perfect, elegant party was a phantom. They had 100 guests arriving the next day to an empty garden. The great unraveling was complete. The production was canceled, the stage was bare, and the director was having a full-blown meltdown. and the star of the show was crying about her Instagram feed. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a garden party. At my parents' house, it was the dawn of their public humiliation. I, of course, was still blissfully unaware in my hotel room, my phone still switched off. My own gala was that evening, and I was spending the morning mentally preparing, enjoying the novel sensation of focusing solely on my own professional responsibilities. The full picture of the morning's horror was painted for me later by my Aunt Margaret. Having been summoned by a hysterical phone call from Louise the night before, she had driven over early, more out of a sense of morbid curiosity than familial duty. She arrived at 9:00 a.m. to a scene of utter bedlam. The garden, which should have been bustling with vendors setting up a marquee and arranging flowers, was starkly, tragically empty. Inside the house, my mother was in her dressing gown, her hair uncombed, her face pale with sleeplessness and fury. She was on the phone, trying to bully the manager of a local grocery store into delivering a mountain of deli platters, but it was a holiday weekend, and they were short-staffed and overwhelmed. He was politely telling her it was impossible. My father, Gary, had retreated into a state of catatonic shock. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the sports section of the newspaper, pretending none of this was happening. It was his default setting for crisis, total avoidance. Megan was crumpled on a sofa, still in her pajamas, intermittently sobbing and scrolling through comments on her latest social media post. "Everyone is asking for party pictures," she sniffled to Aunt Margaret. "What am I going to post? A picture of Mom's catering disaster." Margaret, a woman with little patience for manufactured drama, surveyed the scene with a wry expression. "Well, Louise," she said calmly, "it appears you have a problem." "A problem?" my mother shrieked, slamming the phone down. "It's a catastrophe. Evelyn has sabotaged us. She has done this to us out of spite." "Has she?" Margaret asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or did you perhaps push her a little too far this time?" This, of course, was met with a fresh wave of indignation. My mother launched into a tirade about my selfishness, my cruelty, my inexplicable betrayal. In her version of events, she was the innocent victim of a malicious, unprovoked attack. At 11:00 a.m., my father finally stirred himself to action. His solution was to drive to a bulk warehouse store and fill a car with folding chairs, plastic tables, and several industrial-sized bags of potato chips. He returned an hour later, looking defeated, and began setting up the flimsy chairs in uneven rows across the pristine lawn. The first guests were scheduled to arrive at 4:00 p.m. As the clock ticked closer, a grim, desperate plan was formed. They would tell everyone there was a last-minute disaster with the caterer. Megan was tasked with running to a bakery to buy every cupcake they had left. Louise and Margaret were in the kitchen, frantically trying to arrange crackers and cheese on platters. At precisely 4:00 p.m., cars began to pull into the driveway. Guests in silk dresses and pressed linen suits stepped out, their faces full of cheerful anticipation. They walked around to the garden and stopped dead. Before them was not the elegant affair they had been promised, but a scene resembling a sparsely attended community bake sale. A few plastic tables sagged under the weight of chip bowls and store-bought cupcakes. My father was trying to get a playlist to work on a small portable speaker. My mother stood in the middle of it all, her face a frozen mask of a hostess smile, her eyes filled with sheer panic. The confusion among the guests was palpable. They milled about awkwardly, whispering to each other. "I thought this was a catered event. Where are the decorations? Is everything all right?" My mother, Louise, and my sister, Megan, tried to play it off, flitting between guests with strained pleasantries and vague excuses about a terrible vendor mishap. But the scale of the failure was too vast to hide. It was obvious this was not a minor hiccup. This was a complete collapse. Then, at 4:30 p.m., came the masterstroke. It was the one part of my plan I had scheduled in advance. As the garden reached its peak occupancy of confused, hungry, and uncomfortable guests, a notification chimed, and then another and another. A synchronized buzz swept through the most important players on the lawn. My mother's phone buzzed in her hand. My father's phone buzzed in his pocket. My sister's phone, which she was clutching like a lifeline, buzzed as well. I had sent a single message to a group chat I created containing only their 3 numbers. The message contained no angry words, no recriminations. It was just a link to a meticulously prepared document, a single PDF file. Curiosity overriding their panic, they all opened it. What they saw was an itemized invoice. It was drafted on my professional letterhead. The line items were stark and clear. Project management and coordination, Megan's 16th birthday party. 40 hours at 150/HR. Event logistics and execution, Gary's retirement party. 35 hours at 150/HR. Holiday planning and catering management, Christmas, 10 years. 200 hours at 150/HR. Consultation and vendor procurement, 40th anniversary. 25 hours at 250/HR, rush rate. The list went on and on, a detailed accounting of a decade of my life. Each event, each party, each holiday was listed, with a conservative estimate of my hours and my standard professional rate applied. At the bottom of the final page was the grand total, a number well into the 6 figures. And below the total, I had written a single, final sentence. Consider this my anniversary gift. We are now even. Aunt Margaret described the scene to me later. She saw the color drain from my mother's face. She saw my father stare at his phone as if it had electrocuted him. And she saw Megan's jaw drop, her eyes wide with horrified comprehension. They stood frozen amidst their bewildered guests, the truth of their situation finally, publicly, and humiliatingly unveiled. The cost of my free labor was staring them in the face, and it was a debt they could never, ever afford to pay. While my family stood in the wreckage of their own making, I was backstage at the Children's Hospital Gala. My phone was off, tucked away in my bag. My mind was clear and focused. The energy of a live event surged around me, the chatter of the crew on their headsets, the final sound checks, the scent of hundreds of floral centerpieces. This was my element. This was where I belonged. Here, my skills were valued, my work was compensated, and I was treated as a respected professional. The gala was a resounding success. We raised a record amount for the hospital. My clients were thrilled. As I stood watching the happy, generous crowd, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I had spent so much of my life believing my worth was tied to my family's approval, an approval I could only ever seem to earn by erasing myself. But in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of my own competence and success, I realized I didn't need their approval at all. My worth was inherent. It was built on my own merit, my own hard work. After the event, exhausted but exhilarated, I finally went back to my hotel room and turned on my phone. It exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls from my mother, father, and sister. A string of vitriolic voicemails and texts that I deleted without listening to or reading. And then there was one message from a number I hadn't blocked, Aunt Margaret. "I hope you're having a better evening than the folks here," it read. "Call me tomorrow if you feel like it. I think you'll want to hear this. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you." Her words were a balm. I slept soundly that night. The next day, I called her. She gave me the full, unvarnished account of the party's implosion. She described the stunned silence that followed the arrival of my invoice, the hasty, mumbled departures of the guests who could no longer stand the awkwardness, and the epic, house-shaking argument between my parents and sister that followed. Apparently, once the guests were gone, all the blame that had been directed at me was turned inward. My mother blamed my father for not handling me. My father blamed my mother for being so demanding. And they both blamed Megan for her entitled attitude and her cutting, free labor comment, which Margaret had been all too happy to report I had overheard. The perfect family facade had shattered, and they were left pointing fingers at each other in the ruins. "They just don't get it, Evelyn," Margaret said, her voice a mixture of pity and exasperation. "They're not sorry for how they treated you. They're just furious they got caught. Louise is telling everyone you had some." Kind of mental breakdown. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Let her, I said, it doesn't matter anymore. And it didn't. In the weeks and months that followed, I maintained a strict no-contact policy. I blocked their numbers, their social media accounts, and I instructed my friends not to pass on any messages. The silence was deafening at first, the absence of their constant demands leaving a void in my life. But I quickly filled that void with other things: my work, my friends, my hobbies, and my own peace of mind. My business flourished. Without the constant drain of my family's needs, I had more energy and creativity for my paying clients. I took on bigger projects, hired an assistant, and finally started making the kind of money I had always dreamed of. Megan's social media presence took a hit. Without the backdrop of our family's curated perfection to bolster her aspirational lifestyle brand, her content seemed hollow. She tried to spin the anniversary disaster into a story about overcoming adversity, but her followers saw through it. The comments were brutal. I never received a real apology. About 6 months later, a card arrived from my mother. Inside, it said, "I hope you are well. The holidays are coming up and we miss you." There was no admission of guilt, no acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. It was a classic attempt to rug sweep, to pretend nothing had happened and lure me back into my old role. I threw it in the trash. 1 year to the day after I drove away from their house, I didn't think of it as the anniversary of their failed party. I thought of it as my own anniversary, the anniversary of my independence. To celebrate, I booked a trip to Italy, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time or money for. As I sat at a small cafe in Florence, sipping a cappuccino and watching the world go by, I thought about the unspoken contract. I finally understood that family is not an obligation to be endured, but a relationship to be nurtured. And real relationships are built on mutual respect, not on a legacy of one-sided demands. My parents and sister had never understood that. They saw love as a debt I owed them. I had finally paid that debt, in full, and as the Italian sun warmed my face, I felt a lightness I had never known before. I was free. The books were balanced, the contract was void, and for the first time in my life, the only event I had to plan was my own happy future.